Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Afterthoughts this week with me and Kaylee. Here to chat about my sermon.
Do you want to recap before us?
Yeah, I can quickly recap. So essentially, my big idea was that Jesus sets us free. So we were looking at, again, in Hebrews in chapter 4, and specifically about how Jesus is our high priest. And in a lot of different ways, he actually brings us real freedom. And in being our high priest, he fulfills all the roles that the high priest was supposed to. So there's a bunch of different roles. Most of them actually had to do with freedom. But the high priest was in charge of all the priests. The high priest, when he died, would set a place called, it was like a refuge place for people who had accidentally committed murder. Those people could all go free. And the most important thing he would do was that he would offer the sacrifice of atonement for the sins of Israel. And Jesus fulfills all those things, and that when he dies, the captives go free, or the people are free from their guilt. That he oversees us, who's like a priesthood of believers, but then he sets us free to follow him, and that he actually made atonement for us, and so that we're set free from our sin to follow him, and that he's actually God. And my second point, this is 3, but I mean 2, who relates to us, and that he came down fully as a human being, and he's not like this God who doesn't understand what it's like to struggle as a human being, but actually really does understand it. And Hebrews says that he was even tempted in every way that we are. And I don't think that's just it playing lip service to what Jesus did. I think he genuinely felt the struggle to be human and can relate to us and is with us in our struggle and is able to give us freedom in that. And then lastly, he sets us free essentially to be confident in who we are. Not meaning that, I'm just confident in who I am. I get to be whoever I want to be. Yeah. But it means that because Hebrews talks about how we can come boldly before God's throne because of what Jesus has done and what that language actually means. And actually having the confidence before his throne means that you're able to speak freely and that you're able to act freely. You're not always controlling yourself, which is really interesting. And so I use the analogy of as a pastor, you feel like you're always controlling the way you act around people. And there's very few people, and most people do this too, but with most people, you're often filtering yourself. Right. And there's very few friends where you actually are just yourself. And that God actually says that we can be like that with him, that there's a freedom to be who you are. It doesn't mean that God's not going to push you or challenge you or whatever, but it means that you actually can be authentic and show Jesus everything, and that he's actually given you that. And so that's kind of where we went. It was a bunch of different places, but in general, it was about how Jesus has set us free. So yeah.
Cool. I like it. I have so many thoughts. Okay. When you unpack the high priest, I thought one of the roles of the priest, looking after the priesthood, just historically, how interesting that is. And it had me referencing 1 Peter 2, where it says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." And it's cool. You asked, so you actually did a lot of my work for me. I don't know if you know that. No. You asked questions in your sermon, and there's 3 of them. So we're kind of just gonna do that. But in light of Hebrews and in light of 1 Peter here, it's kind of, those are that twofold kind of, honestly, it kind of makes me feel wonder when I think about even just the fact that he would call us a priesthood just blows my mind. I'm like, Jesus, you're so kind and empowering and pure. And you asked the question, do you believe that Jesus can set you free? And I love that because it ties in with do you believe that you've received mercy? Right? So that would actually be my first question. In what ways, maybe, do you believe that Jesus can set you free, and where do you feel hung up that you struggle with that unbelief? For your second point,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of unpacked verse 15, where it talks about having a high priest who's able to sympathize with us
Yeah.
and being tempted in every way.
Yeah.
And how that's literal, not theoretical or like a nice thing that the Bible just puts in there.
Yeah.
And so when we actually think about the things that we struggle with, or the things that we're tempted by, or the things that we wrestle with, to like, it's meant to be felt that Jesus was just as human.
Mm.
And you asked this question beautifully in your sermon, and it would be the same question I ask. And you asked, do you know that God gets you? And maybe point B to the question would be like, and where have you felt it? Like, where have you felt, oh man, God gets me in this. He understands. He can sympathize with me on this one. So, Aiden, your third point was that Jesus being the high priest means that we can truly be ourselves.
Yeah.
In the purest sense of like how he made us to be, really. And that we can approach this verse 16, that we can approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. And you asked a question which I loved, and I would pose to us again in our groups. And the question was, do you know that you can be free before God? But maybe before we even discuss the question, can I just spontaneously throw a question at you?
Yeah.
Give an example of a time when you felt really free before God, if you feel comfortable sharing that.
When I felt really free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have different examples. I'm like, which one do I use?
Which one's the safest one?
I think in general, I, for a long time, struggled with feeling like, I don't know, God was always disappointed in me. And like, in order for me to even pray, I had to give a long list asking for forgiveness and like really just try to be as mournful as possible before I could even talk to him. And there was a moment, and it's been happening more and more throughout my life, where it's not like, oh, I've arrived.
Sure.
But where it changed pretty drastically, where I don't know, something just clicked as to like recognizing what Jesus did in his death. And specifically, and I kind of talked about this last week, about how when God looks at me, he sees Jesus. He doesn't just see like, I don't know, all the messed up parts of me that I don't feel like he would like. And I was like, oh, like God's actually my dad who cares about me. He's not like this angry person in the sky who's like tolerating me. Yeah. And so I can actually come to him in prayer and talk to him, actually knowing that he knows everything about me. He's not surprised about anything. And that he still deeply loves me and like wants a relationship with me. And it was just a switch. And it's not to say that confession and feeling mournful for sin and whatever is wrong, but it was just like unhealthy to the point of like constantly living in fear of God. And I know people are like, oh, fear of God's the beginning of understanding. I'm like, yeah.
But
It's
not
also
being afraid of his
but not being afraid of him, and it's also the beginning of understanding. It's like actually not. Sometimes
not the ending.
Yeah, sometimes we act like it says the fear of God is like
the key to
the
all.
Constant understanding of life, and it's not. It's the fear of God's the beginning of understanding, and the most common commandment in the Bible is fear not. And I think John talks about how perfect love casts out fear, and the only person who's afraid is someone who expects judgment, and someone who expects judgment doesn't understand God's grace. I think that's literally what John says.
Yeah.
And so to then have that switch and be like, God actually loves me and cares for me, I was able to talk to him freely and feel like I could actually go before his throne confidently. Not that I still don't have reverence for him and who he is, but that it's just different, where I was actually freed up. Like I didn't have to grovel every time I talked to God, and nor did he want me to, which was a big switch in my brain. Because for a long time, I thought the only way God's going to listen to anything I do is if I don't know, mourn and talk about how horrible I am for like 10 minutes first, and then maybe he'll listen to me. And that's not who he is. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Fun story, maybe not so fun, but I had a friend once. We were, when you're like in your late teens, early 20s, and you're feeling really zealous and really passionate about all things in life. And she was having a moment where, she wouldn't mind me sharing this, but she was having a moment where she was just outright angry with God, like just straight up, like, I don't get it. I don't feel like you are who you say you are, and I don't know how to process it. But she'd grown up in the church, and she knew that was like a risky thing to say, let alone feel, or she felt like it was a risky thing to feel. And so she was like, what do you do? Like, what do I do with this? And in my like early 20 wisdom was like, I think you just go yell in a field. I think you just go get to a field with Jesus, and I think you just start yelling. And she was like, what? And I was like, but actually, and I was like, I don't need to be there. I just think you need to go have space with him where you feel free to come before him. And she did. She went out into this field, and she was like, can you stay close by? And I was like, sure. Because she felt like, I think, conscious of it. But she stood out in this field, and she just like, she said some things that I would know she would never say. And I would, but then it turned from this like anger and throwing thought and feeling to God and words at him that she wouldn't have dared utter before, to then like weeping, to then like confessing, to then praising, and then coming back and just being like, oh my goodness, like I think that was the first time I ever felt like seen by him for real. And I was like, wild. And it was just, it speaks to that, like she then realized, oh, now she knows she can be free before him. It was just a really cool process. But so that would be the question. Do you know that you can be free before God? And maybe either way, if yes or no, maybe share with your group in what ways. Alrighty. Well, Aiden, thanks for talking this Sunday. Thanks for reminding us that Jesus has set us free, and we're works in progress, but he's given us his mercy, and if we can receive it, we can actually stand confidently in his freedom. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.